What if what you're watching on the field isn't just bad football, but something far more uncomfortable? Because over the last few weeks, fans watching Shedeur Sanders haven't just been reacting to sacks or stalled drives. They've been rewinding plays, pausing frames, asking the same question over and over: how does this keep happening? Missed blocks happen, confusion happens, but when the same breakdowns show up week after week, in the same situations, with the same results, people stop calling it coincidence. And that's exactly where the conversation around the Cleveland Browns' offensive line is right now. There's been a lot of buzz online, with fans speculating that Sanders isn't just struggling, he's being put in impossible situations. Clean rushers coming through untouched, linemen blocking air, assignments breaking down so fast there's no time to adjust. And somehow, the blame keeps landing in the same place: on the quarterback. What makes this story even more tense is that respected voices have started noticing it too. Former players, analysts, people who know what functional protection looks like, and are openly questioning why it keeps collapsing around Sanders in critical moments. To be clear, there's no confirmed wrongdoing here, no official investigations, no proven intent. But when effort looks uneven on tape and accountability feels one-sided, suspicion fills the silence. Because quarterbacks can fix mechanics, they can speed up reads, but they can't block for themselves. And once you see the clips that sparked this debate, you'll understand why some fans believe this situation is heading towards something much bigger than just another bad stretch of games. The frustration didn't appear overnight. It started quietly, almost unnoticed, right around the moment Shedeur Sanders was officially handed the starting role. At first, the scrutiny was expected. New quarterback, new spotlight, every throw magnified. Analysts across the league began breaking down his tape, pointing out timing, reads, and decision-making. But as those breakdowns went deeper, something else kept showing up on screen over and over again. Protection issues that didn't look random. Clean rushers slipping through gaps that shouldn't exist. Linemen turning their heads the wrong way. Defenders arriving so quickly that plays had no chance to develop. Early on, fans brushed it off as growing pains. New unit, new communication, normal NFL stuff. But then it happened again. And again. Different opponents, same types of breakdowns. Same moments: third downs, fourth downs, red zone snaps. The situations where execution matters most. And suddenly, people weren't just watching the quarterback anymore. They were watching the line before the ball was even thrown. That's when the tone shifted. Because repetition changes perception. One missed block is a mistake. Multiple identical breakdowns across games start looking like a pattern, and fans began asking why those patterns weren't being corrected or even acknowledged. For the Cleveland Browns, that silence mattered. There were no major lineup shakeups, no clear schematic adjustments, no public explanation for why protection kept failing in the same ways. Instead, the messaging stayed vague: execution, communication, things to clean up on tape. Meanwhile, Sanders kept absorbing the consequences: hits, pressures, criticism. That imbalance is what pushed fans from frustration into concern. Because quarterback development depends on rhythm and trust. When protection collapses instantly, timing disappears. Reads get rushed. Mechanics suffer. And then when numbers dip, the blame becomes easy to assign, even if the context tells a different story. By this point, people weren't accusing anyone of intent. They were questioning competence, questioning preparation, questioning whether the environment around Sanders was stable enough for any young quarterback to succeed. And once those questions started circulating, all it took was one clip, one play slowed down frame by frame, to turn quiet concern into full-blown outrage. Because what fans noticed next made it impossible to look away. The moment that changed everything wasn't complicated. It wasn't a disguised blitz or some exotic defensive look. It was simple, and that's exactly why it caused such an uproar. The clip spread fast, slowed down, paused, replayed from every angle, and the more fans watched it, the more uncomfortable it became. On the snap, Shedeur Sanders barely had time to register what was happening. Pressure came clean, straight through the line. No chip, no delay, no resistance. A defender was in his face almost instantly, blowing up the play before it could even begin. That's when viewers stopped asking what went wrong and started asking who was blocking who. Because in the clip, one lineman appears locked onto nothing. Another turns his head away from the rusher, and instead of a fight at the point of attack, there's hesitation, the kind that stands out even to casual fans. It didn't look like someone getting beat. It looked like confusion, or worse, disengagement. Social media exploded. People weren't breaking down schemes anymore. They were circling jerseys, counting steps, asking why defenders were running free on crucial downs while the quarterback took the hit again. And what made it worse was the situation. This wasn't a throwaway snap early in the game. It was a high-leverage moment, the exact kind where effort and communication are supposed to tighten, not unravel. Some tried to calm the reaction. Offensive line play is messy. Things happen fast. But others pushed back, pointing out something that couldn't be ignored anymore. This wasn't the first time. Similar clips had already surfaced in previous games. Same type of breakdown, same lack of engagement, same result. That's when outrage replaced debate. Because once fans started lining these plays up side by side, the pattern became clear. Pressure arriving untouched wasn't the exception. It was becoming routine. And no quarterback, rookie, or veteran can function in an offense where breakdowns happen before the play even has a chance to breathe. What fueled the anger even more was where the conversation went next. Instead of focusing on protection, commentary quickly shifted back to Sanders, holding the ball too long, needing to adjust, needing to be quicker. Fans weren't buying it. There's a difference between pressure you need to feel and pressure that arrives before you can react. And in these clips, there was nothing to adjust to. That single moment didn't just expose a bad play. It exposed a trend. And once people accepted that, the focus shifted away from clips and straight toward the players involved. Once the shock wore off, the spotlight narrowed. This wasn't about a generic offensive line anymore. It was about who was on the field and why the same names kept appearing in the same uncomfortable moments. Veterans, players with years in the league, players who've seen every stunt, twist, and pressure look defenses can throw at you. That's why fans started zeroing in on familiar faces and asking questions they hadn't wanted to ask before. Not accusations, questions. Because when experienced linemen miss basic handoffs, hesitate on contact, or lose leverage instantly, it doesn't get chalked up to rookie mistakes. It raises concerns about communication, preparation, and urgency. And when those concerns repeat across games, the benefit of the doubt starts to disappear. What made this even harder to ignore was the contrast between tape and messaging. Publicly, the tone remained upbeat. Coaches praised toughness, leadership, availability, effort. The same phrases you hear when a team wants to project stability. But fans watching the film saw something else: missed exchanges, late reactions, and defenders coming through untouched while the quarterback paid the price. That disconnect created tension. Because when the narrative says everything is fine but the evidence says otherwise, trust erodes. And once trust erodes, people start asking why accountability feels selective. That's where Shedeur Sanders comes back into focus. He was absorbing the hits. He was answering the questions. He was owning outcomes publicly. Meanwhile, structural failures were softened with language and moved past quickly. For a lot of fans, that imbalance became the story. Quarterbacks are always judged harshly, that's part of the job. But when protection collapses instantly and repeatedly, the line between evaluation and exposure starts to blur. Development requires stability, rhythm, a chance to operate within the offense as designed. Without that, mistakes multiply and confidence takes a hit. Online, former players weighed in cautiously. Some called it miscommunication. Others said it looked like hesitation, the one thing linemen can't afford. No one claimed intent, but no one dismissed the pattern either. And patterns matter. By this point, the conversation had moved beyond bad plays. It was about standards, about whether experience was being mistaken for reliability, and about why change seemed to come so slowly despite mounting evidence. Because when veterans struggle and the system doesn't adjust, someone else inevitably takes the blame. And as the scrutiny intensified, one voice cut through the noise and reframed everything, not with outrage but with analysis. And that's when the tone of the entire debate changed. The debate shifted the moment analysis replaced emotion. When former NFL quarterback Chase Daniel broke down the tape, he didn't sound angry. He didn't lean into viral language. He focused on structure, and that's what made his comments land harder than any rant online. Daniel didn't point to reckless throws or poor reads. He pointed to timing that never had a chance to exist, protection that collapsed before roots could develop, an offense asking its quarterback to operate on borrowed seconds. In his words, Sanders wasn't being helped. And then he highlighted something most people missed. On a misdirection play, Shedeur Sanders didn't disengage after the handoff. He stayed in the play. He stepped into traffic and threw a block, not because it would show up on a stat sheet, but because that's what leaders do when things aren't working. That moment mattered. Because quarterbacks who are overwhelmed usually retreat. They protect themselves. Sanders didn't. He leaned in. He tried to manufacture help when the structure around him failed to provide it. Daniel's breakdown reframed everything. This wasn't a quarterback panicking under pressure. This was a quarterback adapting to constant breakdowns, shortening throws, taking what the defense gave him, using his legs when protection disappeared, doing exactly what coaches ask young quarterbacks to do when chaos hits. And yet, the numbers didn't reflect that effort. That's where the disconnect became undeniable. Stat lines don't show how fast pressure arrives. They don't show free rushers or blown assignments. They don't show a quarterback making survival decisions just to keep the offense functional. Daniel was careful not to accuse anyone of intent. He didn't claim sabotage. He simply made it clear that evaluating Sanders without acknowledging what's happening in front of him was incomplete. Fans seized on that. Because for the first time, someone with NFL credibility validated what the tape had been suggesting all along. Not that Sanders was perfect, but that the environment was working against him. And once that idea took hold, people went back to the clips with a different lens, not looking for blame, but for explanation. That's when the conversation took its most dangerous turn. Because when analysis confirms dysfunction and accountability still doesn't follow, speculation fills the gap. And what fans began whispering next pushed this story beyond football mechanics and into something much more volatile. Once expert breakdowns confirmed that something structurally was wrong, the conversation didn't slow down, it escalated. And this time, it moved beyond film study and into territory most fans are usually hesitant to touch. There's been a lot of buzz online, with rumors suggesting that frustration inside the locker room may be affecting what's happening on the field. To be clear, there is no verified evidence of intentional wrongdoing, no official complaints, no league action, just whispers and patterns people are struggling to reconcile. Some fans speculate that not everyone up front is fully locked in. Others claim resentment has built around the attention surrounding Shedeur Sanders, the spotlight, the expectations, the constant coverage. Again, speculation, but it didn't come from nowhere. It came from effort questions on tape. On certain snaps, blocks don't just fail, they vanish. Hands don't engage, feet stop moving, recovery never comes. And when that happens repeatedly in high-leverage moments, viewers naturally start asking uncomfortable questions, not accusing, asking. Former players online have weighed in cautiously, saying there's a visible difference between getting beaten and hesitating. And hesitation at the offensive line position is deadly. It doesn't require bad intent. Sometimes it's mental, sometimes it's frustration, sometimes it's a breakdown in trust. And trust is fragile. There have also been reports claiming that some linemen have privately criticized Sanders' play style and the noise that follows him. Nothing on record, nothing confirmed, but enough chatter to raise eyebrows, especially when paired with breakdowns that don't seem evenly distributed. Still, none of this excuses what's happening. If frustration exists, it's on leadership to address it. Coaches manage egos. Veterans set the tone. Organizations enforce standards. When that doesn't happen, dysfunction creeps in quietly, and it shows up in effort, communication, and execution. What makes the situation feel even more unbalanced is where blame consistently lands. Dropped passes fade from discussion. Missed assignments get softened, but stalled drives circle back to the quarterback. And that imbalance fuels the perception that Sanders is carrying responsibility that extends far beyond his role. Because despite everything, the chaos, the pressure, the speculation, he's still standing in the pocket, still delivering throws under fire, still answering questions without deflection. And that's why this speculation has weight. Not because it's proven, but because it exists in a vacuum created by silence, repetition, and unresolved failure. And when that happens, the story stops being about what's breaking down and starts being about who's responsible for fixing it. By this point, the pattern was too loud to ignore. Every stalled drive, every ugly stat line, every incomplete pass seemed to circle back to the same conclusion: the quarterback must be the problem. And yet, when the lens widened even slightly, the inconsistency in how blame was assigned became glaring. Because when protection collapses, when assignments are missed, when timing never has a chance to exist, accountability suddenly becomes vague. It's execution, it's communication, it's things we'll clean up. No names, no ownership, just collective language designed to dull the edges. But when numbers dip, when completion percentage drops, when the offense sputters, that's when responsibility gets very specific. And it lands squarely on Shedeur Sanders. That's the disconnect fans can't reconcile. Quarterbacks are always judged harshly. That's part of the job. But evaluation only works when context is applied evenly. You can't shield structural failures while spotlighting individual outcomes. You can't preach collective responsibility in press conferences and then quietly allow one player to absorb the fallout. And that's exactly how this has felt. Missed blocks are chalked up to bad reps. Dropped passes disappear from the conversation. Coaching missteps are softened with explanations about timing or weather. But the quarterback's struggles are magnified, isolated, and debated relentlessly. That imbalance creates resentment, not just among fans, but within locker rooms. Because when standards aren't applied consistently, trust erodes. And when trust erodes, performance follows. Football is the ultimate interdependent sport. One breakdown exposes another. One failure compounds the next. What makes this especially dangerous is how it affects development. Young quarterbacks don't just need reps, they need stability. A sense that mistakes will be corrected systemically, not absorbed personally. When that balance tips, confidence doesn't vanish overnight. It leaks slowly, and by the time it's visible, the damage is already done. Fans aren't asking for excuses, they're asking for honesty. If protection is failing, say it. If personnel isn't working, change it. If coaching adjustments are late, own it. Because pretending everything is fine While the quarterback keeps taking hits doesn't protect the team, it protects narratives. And that's where this story becomes bigger than any one game. Because when organizations protect optics instead of infrastructure, they don't just risk losing games, they risk losing players. And now, with pressure mounting from all sides, Cleveland faces a decision that will define this entire chapter. Because what happens next won't just shape Sanders' season. It will determine whether this organization has learned anything at all. This is where everything finally converges. Because no matter how you feel about the debate, one truth now sits front and center. What's happening around Shedeur Sanders isn't just a rough patch. It's a test, not of talent, but of organizational clarity and accountability. The Browns can frame this however they want. Growing pains, tough matchups, learning curves. Every struggling team has a dictionary full of explanations, but explanations don't change patterns, decisions do. And the pattern here is clear. Historic pressure, repeated breakdowns, sudden roster shuffling, vague accountability, and a quarterback who continues to answer for outcomes that clearly extend beyond his control. That combination doesn't just stall progress, it creates long-term risk. This is why respected voices across the league have started saying the quiet part out loud. Analysts like Mel Kiper Jr. have emphasized that nothing matters more for Cleveland right now than fixing the foundation up front. Not patchwork moves, not short-term fixes, real investment, real protection. Because the NFL has seen this movie before. Talented quarterbacks don't usually fail because they can't play. They fail when organizations mistake toughness for development and patience for planning. When protection collapses and accountability blurs, even the most resilient players eventually pay the price. What makes this moment so pivotal is that Sanders hasn't folded. He hasn't deflected. He hasn't lost composure. He's played through chaos with professionalism, the kind teams claim they want at the position. That's why this crossroads matters. Cleveland can choose to confront what's actually broken, apply standards evenly, fix the infrastructure instead of the optics, or they can keep pushing responsibility downward and hope resilience covers the cracks. But hope isn't a strategy. Because franchises don't usually ruin quarterbacks with one loud mistake. They do it by ignoring the warning signs until confidence erodes, development stalls, and the narrative becomes irreversible. And right now, those warning signs are flashing. So the real question isn't whether Sanders is good enough. The tape already answers that. The question is whether this organization is willing to do what it takes to give him a real chance, or whether this moment will be remembered as the point where everyone saw the problem and waited too long to fix it.